We're up to Daf Gimel. Today, Shabbos. Today is Blot. So we are up to the Gemara here. Ahu Itza. We're talking about trying to understand the intent of a woman when she agrees to something. So first we talked about when she had no choice, she agreed. Was she actually agreeing, or she just wanted to get whatever her ultimate aim was? Says the Gemara here, about 15 lines to the top of the page. The last one of the line is Ahu Itza. There was a woman that became a Zavna Varshachi. There was a woman that was buying over there the Varshachi, and so what happened was this man grabbed from her this Varshachi. And but also who Gabba came along, a person grabbed it away from her, stole it from her. Amrullah, he said to him, Hava Nelly, give it back, return it. Amalei said to her, I will. If I will return it to you, if I return it to you, will you be agreed to marry me with this that I'm giving you now? Shakalte, she took it, the ishtike, and she was quiet. And the question is, so the fact that she took it, does that indicate that she's happy to get married to him, or she just wants to take her item back? She could say, yes, I took it. I took my own. So you might ask a question. Will ask a question. Question. It says in the Braisa, says Kitcha Begezel. It says later on, Akadasher Begezel, stolen goods of a Chamas. Chamas is also sort of stolen. They paid for it, but they forced you to sell for it. Or through Geneva. He grabbed a seller from her hand, the kitchen, then he returned to her and said, You're Mekudesh with the Mekudesh. And all these occasions, here we see clearly that he returns the item to her and she accepts it. That means that she's happy to Mekudesh. Says the Gemara, so now making a difference whether they discussed getting married prior to this or not. If they discussed getting married prior to this, then if he returns a stolen item, she doesn't say that she doesn't, and he says, with this, you're married to me, and she doesn't reject it, that means she accepts it. If they haven't spoken about marriage, stop in the belt tonight, he said, you're Mekudesh me with this, then obviously she's not interested in getting married, she just wants her item back. Says the Gemara, how do we know the Shanilan, there's a difference between Shadich Udaloi Shadich? How do we know there's a difference between Shadich and not Shadich? And we did talk about it, it's valid. The time of the Braisa, Amalei said to her, Konsi sell lazu sha'ani chayiv, take the seller, I owe you money, take it. And then the Chaz of Amalei, then he said to her, Hiskacheli boy, I want you to be Mekudesh to me with it. So we say, B'shas Matan Moyes, if she said this, he said, this money. First he said, take this coin as money that I owe you, as payment. And then he said, you know what, you be Mekudesh with that money. So if he said it at the time when he was giving it to her, and then it depends. Rotzos if she consented Mikadeshes, and Loy Rotzos if she did not consent, ain't a Mikadeshes, she's not engaged. Obvious. But once he gave it to her, he said, "There's a payment." And after it was in her hand, he said, "This is also for Kiddushin." Then, or this is for Kiddushin. I feel even she says, "I accept." Ain't a Mikadeshes. She is not Mikudesh. Why? Because he paid her back her money. It's her money. So he's not giving her anything. How is he Mikudesh? And what do you mean Rotzel? My Loy Rotzel. She said yes. And Loy Rotzel, when she said Loy Rotzel, the Amra Loy, she said no. So we can infer from that if she said nothing, it would be valid Kiddushin. Even though it was a chay that he owed, if she said nothing, then it would be valid Kiddushin. So then just say V'nistim Mekadesh Stam. Say that she's engaged. Kihasam. Like in other cases, she's engaged. There's no point in saying that she doesn't agree. She's not Mekudesh. Of course she's not a Mekudesh. We don't need to tell us that. To say she's Mekudesh obviously means when she's quiet, whatever, she's Mekudesh. Elo the Rotzdam and Loy Rotzda the Ishtika, she was quiet. She didn't say no. And therefore, the Katani says, and that's the Kiddushin. That if she was quiet, she's not Mekudesh. He gave it to her and he said, this is a Kiddushin, and she was quiet, not Mekudesh. Even though she was quiet before he gave it to her. He said, I'm giving you, I owe you money. Then he changed, he said, I want this to be Kiddushin, and she didn't say a word. And yet it says here she's not Mekudesh. Before we said that he is Mekudesh, My time, you say, in shakli, shakli. She could say, I took my own thing back. What about the place where it says in Makadasha with stolen goods, she is Makudish? The Kasha had the Kotcha Begezel Chamagneva, He grabbed it from her hand, Vikitcha Mikadashes. Allah Shmani, you have only one possible conclusion, and that is Hadashadich, Hadalashadich. They spoke about it before, and she replied, it's acceptable. I mean, she accepts it. If she did not speak about it before, it's not. Big Machek is a let's say that they did speak about it before, and then he stole her something from her, and then he gave it to her, and he said, "You're Makudish to me with this," and she was quiet to tell me she's Makudish. Being Machlek is, does he still owe her the money to pay for this stolen item? One view is that she was Michael. Another view is that no, she was thinking that she's lending it back to him so that he can give it to her as Kiddushin, but he still owes her the money. So Machlek is actually what about when it comes to a loan? Let's say he owes her the money and they spoke about it, and she was quiet. So he said that, and first he says this alone, and then he said this is Mekud, this is Kedushin. Does he still owe the money or not? Some people say in this case definitely she is Meichel, and others say definitely she's not Meichel. And the Ramosh Allah makes also a distinction between if it's a chayv or whether it's stolen good. Yeah. Studying about it further. Kinoch nafshe that when Rab Asi passed away, they started gathering together. And there's actually a machlek is also she said, "I'll be mekudesh too." Actually, is mekudesh. The same thing. The stolen goods, maybe she just wanted it back. Anyway, Ravasi passed away. The Rabbanim gathered, collected a number of sayings of his they shouldn't forget. One rabbi said, name of Yaakov, Hachem Nasi Ramani, Kishem Shenish Nikin Pocher Puta, a woman is not Nikin less than Puta. Kach ein Karka Nikin is Pocher Puta. So too, you cannot purchase Karka less than a Puta. Teshri has a difficulty with this because we learned the laws of acquiring women from acquiring property. So how can you learn dinim from property from women when it's the other way around? So he says the Gemara has a habit of doing that, things which are simpler and easier. Sometimes we swap it around just to make it easier. Or they don't believe, they don't follow the first opinion we had in the Gemara that we learned Kicha Kicha the Efron, they learned the other one, the Yatzachinim Menkas. So the Gemara, Amrulay, how can you say that by the time you learned Alpha Pisha, a woman cannot be required, less the Pruta of a Karka, Niknis, the Pachar, but Karka can. Amrulay, Kitani Ibechalipin, less the Pruta, but not from a Kinyan Kesel or Kinyan Chalipin. And we said before that Isha cannot be nicknamed with Chalipin, but like Rashi says, or other, like Rashi says, other Shayim, because it's an indignity for her or other reasons. The time we learned, Kainin Bikli, Alpha Pisha ain't Shabbat Pruta. You can use a Keli for Chalipin, even though it's not worth a Pruta to acquire property. Hada Yasi, they still sat there with Kamri, he said some other things in his name. Hada Mirishmo, Kosheni, David, anybody's not an expert in the laws of Gittin Kedusha, should not have any Geshet with it. I said to you last time, the Rebbe said, it's not pshat if you don't know Gittin, don't do Gittin. If you don't know Kedushin, don't do Kedushin. If you don't know anything about Gittin, even though you might know about Kedushin, you should be involved in this whole thing because mistakes can happen. Amar Abasi, Amar B'Yechin, the caution la'il Yechin would cause more damage to this world than the Avedas that were committed in Deir HaMabel. As it says in Pashaino that if you make problems with Beishadish and all that, it's worse than the Avedas that Deir HaMabel did. So they said, Shnemer says in Pasik, Allah the Chichish swore and they denied, but Atzeach the gunner, they killed and they stole the knife and they were what do you call promiscuous and worse. Paratsu, there was Pirza there. The Damim bedamim nagu. And Damim bedamim nagu. It can mean money against money or blood against blood. What exactly does it mean? Says the Gemara, my mashma, so what do you see from there? The target of Yeshe, my leading banim and they're gonna have commit adultery and they'll have children mamzayim. And the chayvin al chadim they will add more crimes upon more crimes. Will heap up crimes. Rabbi Yosef was a blind, so he can't say about peh. As Taisha says in the beginning of Babakama, that Rabbi Yosef used to say everything in Targum. So he was an expert in Targum. So dummy means committed adultery. Says the Gemara. See, if it says a pasuk, Al therefore others, the land will mourn, will umla, kol yeshiba. And that's what they'll sit there. And the birds and the animals, the gam, the gayam, yes, and also the fish, they all die. Says the Gemara. So how's that worse than Dera Mabul? The Dera Mabul, like on Zayda al Dogim. The Dera Mabul, there wasn't a Zayda on the fish. I'll see then the Zvachim about where the Mabul was and so on. Should it be yam? So it says Mikola should be only a dry land you die, but doggy should be yam. Doggy should be yam. Over here, even fish in the water. The question that the Rishonim already asked, the Aveda of Dera Mabul was the same. Also committed adultery and everything else. So one of the Rishonim said that even the Dera Mabul, as bad as they were, they only had relations with single women, and they had a lot of znus, not with married women. Interesting. Well, the other difference is this is before Manteris, after Manteris. We should know better. They do all the Avedas together. Like that, it says, just for swearing false, they already ruined the land. So therefore it shows that each Avedas independently was sufficient to cause their destruction. Maybe a Shavu is separate and the rest is separate, because we know that a Shavu of a little more Shavu is the entire world trembled when the Abish said the third commandment, Leisisa, Miksi, they. It doesn't say with a Vav. For a said with a Vav, that means they're just adding on. It's all bunched together by saying parotcha. Each one was independent of the next one. So the Gemara, in the Mishnah, Isha should be a chatos, a woman. She had to bring a chatos, and she had to bring an oil. She gave birth, and she brought a chatos, and then mesa, and then she died. She still has this outstanding carbon oil, even though generally speaking, an oil is brought. Yeah. Like the Yosha should bring her oil. The Yosha should bring her oil, her carbon. Now, the Gemara says, when do they have to bring her oil? She's passed away already. Only if she already set it aside, they have to bring it to the base of English. But if she's not set it aside, no, why not? Alma, they hold. Alma, we see, so they hold. She would love that ice, even though she made a promise, a commitment. She has a chayv, but she passed away. The chayv disappears with her. There's no shibud on her assets. This is what we're quoting here, that even though she did not set it aside, nevertheless the children have to bring it. Alma kasar, they hold shibuda havi the right. That shibud is mahatoida, involved on the assets, that all her assets, the Barinish are an oliver guarantor for her. Says the Gemara that this very machlekes of shibuda is the raisa, not the raisa we already have between Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Shmuel, where the Gemara of Pligi Bochad already learned that Rabbi Shmuel milva an or alone you cannot collect. You cannot collect from anybody just directly from the borrower, not from people who bought properties, because there's no lien on any of the assets. And why not? Because shibuda lav the raisa. As the Gemara, sorry. So Rabbi Shmuel said, however, in fact, they say you do collect from Yoshua Kochas. Why? Because there's a shibud on the assets. They bought those assets. They have to reimburse the malva. So we have a machlekes. Says the Gemara, we need them both. We only learned, let's say this case here, I would say, Shmuel, only in the case of a loan. The reason why you're paying it back, not because written in the Torah, you're paying it back because you lent money, so therefore you have to pay it back. But in the other cases, let's say you led it, or in other cases, I would say, giving a carbon, which is a mitzvah the Torah gave you, there is a shibud asset. The Eibishter created this chayiv, maybe he put a shibud on the assets. And we only knew the case of your letter say, since it's written in the Torah, as if it's written in the Shtar. The other ones, maybe everywhere else the Maida, that's alone. There's no shibud on the assets, therefore you need both. Amar Papa says, Hilchas Halachi is milva peh. If it's an oral loan, then min hayosha, you could collect from the yosha because there is a shibud on the assets, shibud that I said. The Einu gave them in Alakucha, but you cannot collect from people who buy because they didn't know about it. It was an oral loan, nobody knew about it, so it's not fair. So to protect them, the Rabbanans intervened. Gave them El Yoshish with an Isa. Einu gave them Kucha, the less there's no coil. So a couple of things. First of all, what's the discussion of the crux of the argument, whether we say Shibud is the Rice or Shibud is the Rabbanan? So the number of ways of learning. Ritva wants to learn that it's a question of Svara. That one Svara said that Shibuda deraisa, even though it's not a full really lien on the asset because it's not really a full kinyan, because could very well be the guy will pay out with cash and then there's no lien on the assets anymore. So like a chatzi kinyan, you can't do a chatzi kinyan. So there's a thing as Shibuda deraisa. Another opinion says that is the structure of this particular kinyan, and therefore, if you could do more than a full kinyan, you do half a kinyan, it's not valid. But this is how it works. You have a choice: either collect from the assets or collect money. If he gives them money, you cannot collect an asset, so it's not considered chatzi kinyan. So I'm going to learn from a pasuk that one pasuk says that you have to bring out the mashkin yitzia avod, that the borrower has to bring out the mashkin to the lender, so that shows there's a shibud on assets as well. Another opinion says that no, that's talking about only becomes the day of payment. You can't pay. So in lieu of payment, you have to bring a mashkin. That's something else. That's not a shibud on assets at all. That's a form of payment, and so on and so forth. Then, even if we hold that milva, there's no shibud deraisa, but if you wrote in the shtar that I am placing a shibud on the assets, and there are a number of shayim who hold that even if you hold shibud alav deraisa, when you clearly put in the shtar, it works. So the Gemara says here that a milva haksuv v'toyde kiksuv v'shtar. That means, what does that help? Kiksuv v'shtar is not, there's no shibud. So the Gemara is telling us here that no, if you actually incorporate in the shtar, then it is considered a shibud. Taisus gives examples of milva ksuv v'toyre, for example, to bring a korban. That's a mitzvah from the Torah. Or pidyon ben. These are amounts that you never would know if you have. First, you wouldn't even know you have to pay, but if you have to pay, you wouldn't have a clue how much. So that's all from the Torah. Erichin, you say my value I'm donating based on Mikdash, the Torah says so, and also he includes nezikin, which is difficult to understand. Why a nezikin considered I caused damage, I have to pay according to the damage I caused. That's not a milva ksuva Torah. That's a milva that is a debt that I brought upon myself, and I'm paying exactly the damage that I made. So possibly it's called milva ksuva Torah because there are laws what kind of properties you can pay. We'll learn it in Baba Kama, meitav sadeu, meitav karma yesham. You got to pay from idiots. We already had that in Gittin before, paying on zakat. You have to pay from the best of your properties. So therefore, that considered milva ksuva Torah. Because on our own, we would never know that. You can give any property. What's the difference? Then Teza wants to know that how Gemara here and Baba Basa contradict each other, because Baba Basa clearly the Gemara concludes that your Buddha's love the right, so the same Rapapa. And Teza wants to make a distinction between a milva that's b'shtar or milva peh. And milva b'shtar is shibuda deraisa, but a milva peh, an oral loan, that there's no shibud from the Torah, only midrabanan. That's what Rapapa is talking about over there in Balbasa, and here it's talking about milva b'shtar. And there are other answers and so on. Let's continue the Gemara. Says the Gemara, the next part of the mission is the kohen is atzma beget mizabal. She gets her freedom either through a divorce or the husband dying. I understand. Right now, the Gemara thinks that the reason why if a husband dies, she's set free is because there's nobody anymore. There's no longer anybody there tying the knot because he's gone. So the Gemara says, Bishlei Meget is a pasuk because let's say for krisis. Elamis is about Menon. How do you know that the husband can die? So the Gemara swaru. It's a svara. Who asra, who sharsa. He's the one who placed the Isur. So now he permitted by not existing anymore. So she is not that he freed her. There's no one anymore around to continue to maintain that prohibition that she cannot marry anybody else. She's no longer tied to anybody in particular. Says the Gemara, let's say your father's wife. The asra, you're not going to marry. But shuttle is not permitted even after the father dies. It's still forbidden, even though he's no longer around. To keep that Isser Ella. The Gemara goes through now a list of things. But the Torah said, Yevama, She'ein Labani Masura. Yevama had children, cannot marry anybody else, just to marry her brother-in-law. Ha Yesh Labani, sounds like if she did have children, she is permitted to marry anybody else. That's how we know. If her husband died, she's permitted to marry. Muteris. Saying, but how do you know to make that inference? Dilma, Ein Labani, if she has no children, Osalam, forbidden to the world, but happily she's mutter, Prishaya Leyavam. The yesh but if he did have children, she's also to everybody, including her brother-in-law. Elo, another proof. Said Almana, the Kohen Gadol Surah. Kohen Gadol cannot marry Almana. But if nobody can marry Almana, what do you tell me about a Kohen Gadol? All the Kohen Hedyet, Shadi is permitted. But again, maybe the level of the Isra is different. But Dilma, the Kohen Gadol the lav. Kohen Gadol you get a lav, but Lekuli Alma is only an asay. That once the husband died, so we lessen the Isra, and now it's only an asay. So what I say might be, but he comes and say, if the husband's death now takes away the Isur, then Tisha Gamri should permit it. And if the husband's death did not help It took me b'milza kamaisa. She's still a married woman. Nothing changed. And why do you have to make a special Issa for a Kohen Gadol? Alamulai fikta. Why not? Afikta memisavu kimta. I say we find so many times that the Issa level goes down from a higher level to a low level. For example, midi dehabi absolute mikdashim, a carbon that contracted a flaw, a defect. The mikara in the beginning is, but if you use it for yourself, you're stealing. I see the begiza. Avodah is forbidden, sharing the wall or avodah, doing any work. Parkina, but you redeemed it. Me'il lesbos, no longer stealing, but gives avodah city, but you still can't share it or do work with it. So there are changes. What exactly is the asay? It's a machlekes rishonim. Tosh says the asay is, it says a pasuk v'doveg ishto, a person should cleave to his wife. So if the husband dies and you move to another person, you're over the asay of a doveg ishto. That's one opinion. And Rashi has another pasuk. Rashi says it says in the pasuk that v'yatza v'hoisel ish achad. That how can she marry another person only through a get? Which means if you marry her, that husband died not through a get. You're over that asay, which said that you can only marry through a get. Elam in the Amak, the pasuk why they should return from the army if they just got married. Another person will take her. So it's clear from here we see that another person is allowed to take her if he's dead, and therefore you don't want that to happen. Why can't it be that the Torah is referring to your brother will end up with her instead of you? And when it says in Torah, acher, someone else, it meant your brother, her brother-in-law, I mean your brother. Two problems with that. The yavam loy ikra achas is when do you call a yavam a stranger? Yeah, at least in this matter. It says in the pasuk, she left the first husband after divorce, married the second one, and he wrote her again. Or the second person died and she wants to go back to her husband, it's forbidden. So we're comparing the two examples was either divorce or death. Says the Gemara, we're changing our view. It's not a question of that is no longer somebody there to maintain the Issa, therefore she permitted. No. The Isk is Misha Legadishin. We compare Misa to divorce. Ma Gadishin Sharia, just like divorce, is permitted. The Gaimetis, it acts as a release in a proactive way. Misa Shadi Gemetis. Misa too opens and permits her and concludes and she's completely free. So it's not because he's not around, but because by the act of dying sets her free. And this has to do with what we talked about the question that Trum Sadeshan asked about Eliyahu Navi and so on. Says the Gemara, how do you acquire Yavama through Bia? The Bia Minon Hadi is one of the methods of acquiring your brother-in-law. In fact, that's not one of the methods, it's the only method. On Makra, it says a pasuk, the brother-in-law should have relations with her. Will take her as a wife. So it says Yavela, which is Bia. It says Gemara, since the Torah compares him to a wife, so maybe other did it also. Kesef, Shtar. They will call him Kisha, in all respects like a wife. When they can't be the time we learned. Yachu ye Kesef Shtar, Goyim should be a Gemara. We thought that Kesef Shtar should work with her just like Bia, Tamalema, says the pasuk. The yiv ma, which means that's the only method. Bia gemeres ba ain't kesev shtar goyim ba. Only bia concludes or consummates their relationship, not money and not shtar. The ema, how do you know it means that? May my the yiv, you know what yiv means? The baal karcha miyabim against her will. So as we know, a yavam doesn't need her consent. In kelei vi yabim. Let's just say the pasuk vi yabim. Why is it a yiv ma? Sham two things in there that the first thing you can do by coercer, and the second thing is that only Bia consummates the relationship. The other method is chalitza. Says the Gemara, Menon, how do you know? When Tafidal and Rav, how do you know the chesiv? It says the nikush might be so base chalutzanol, and her name will be called. He will be called amongst the Yidden base chalutzanol, the house that the shoe was removed. And now, as soon as you remove the shoe, hutul Yisrael. It says shmoi be Yisrael. That means that she's now a free woman amongst all the Yidden. Says Gemara, how do you know? Hi Yisrael, the Hachi does. That's what it's for. I'm a boiler. We need to look at the Tanya of Shmuel by Yehuda, by Yisrael, the Bezdin Shei Yisrael. All Yisrael means it has to be done in front of a Bezdin of Yisrael. So it's not to teach you that has to be amongst that she's now free to marry any Yid. The Leil Bezdin of Chav, not a Bezdin of Goyim. Says the Gemara, Trei be Yisrael. It says twice Yisrael. Takati meboile. So you want to two dinner from there. Well, first of all, it should be a Jewish Bezdin court and not a Goyish court. And the second thing is that she's now mutter to marry any Yisrael that she wants. So the Gemara, Lakati, we still need time to be learned. Amr Yehuda, Pamachas once. Hayinu Yishrim, we had the Gemara Yivamas, who were sitting leafing up Tarfu, Ubasa Yivama Lachlas, came along a Yivama to go ahead and remove a shoe. And Tarfu said to all of us, Anu Kulchem, respond, please, all of you, Amru, and say out this pasuk loud. Chalitza now, say this pasuk what? Chalutza now. Say that pasuk loud. So we learned that from V'nikra Shmoi, that everyone should scream out together. Says the Gemara, that is V'nikra Shmoi, not from the word V'nikra Shmoi. But from the Yisro, we learned two other dinim. It has to be a Jewish court, and we learned that she's not permitted to marry any Eid that she wants. Okay, be well, everybody, and a good Shabbos as well.